The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, my name is Tom O'Neill, and I'd like to welcome you to a discussion with Graham Hancock, and is author of the new book, Fingerprints of the Gods. Graham, I found your book interesting, and it gives a completely different picture of the history of mankind. How did you become interested in this topic?
I've spent the last 20 years traveling around the world, and I feel very privileged to have done so, visiting many ancient archaeological sites. And it gradually became apparent to me that the picture that I was being given of some of these archaeological sites by the professional historians and academics didn't quite fit with what I was seeing in front of me. And as I extended this into readings of ancient mythology, I became more and more convinced that something was wrong. And I decided to apply my skills as an investigative researcher into looking again at the past of mankind, to see whether there was something else there which the historians hadn't picked up. And what I've ended up concluding on the basis not only of my own work, but also of the work of many other people around the world who are equally dissatisfied with the conventional view of history, is that there's been a huge forgotten episode in human history, that in fact we're a species with amnesia, and that a great lost civilization lies way back in our own past, and that we really do need to recover our memory of that lost episode.
How long did it take you to do the research and to write this book?
Well, in a sense, the research of the book is a life's work. I've been gathering information on this subject for many years, but as a focused piece of research, round about 3 to 4 years, and a year of solid writing at my desk. And it's very much a mixture of pragmatic field research, travels in places like Bolivia, the high Andes, Peru, Mexico, and Egypt. Egypt being the single most important location where we can recover evidence of this lost civilization, because it's there that the survivors of this great lost civilization left the most detailed traces of their presence.
I think, as most other students, I know, and at one time or another is fascinated by the pyramids and the other monuments in Egypt. How is it that the experts can be so wrong about the chronology as you cover in your book?
The problem with Egyptology is that it is a one-dimensional view of the past. Egyptologists focus entirely on material artifacts that they dig out of the ground, and they don't allow other evidence into their picture at all. But to understand a complex ancient civilization like Egypt, it's necessary to look at it from many different points of view, and it's also necessary to shed all your preconceptions and simply to confront the evidence at face value. I've actually met many Egyptologists, and others have put this down in print, who state that they know more about the ancient history of the ancient Egyptians than the ancient Egyptians did themselves. And it's this rather arrogant attitude of modern scholarship which I think has led to a huge misunderstanding about the origins of ancient Egyptian civilization. It's most clearly evident in the case of the pyramids, the 3 great pyramids of Giza, with the Great Pyramid, of course, being the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. There's an Egyptological fixation that these monuments are tombs, because other pyramids in Egypt have been demonstrated to be tombs. But in fact, there's not a single shred of evidence which supports the view that the 3 great pyramids at Giza were ever built as tombs. Not one single body of any pharaoh has ever been found inside them. And furthermore, the monuments are completely anonymous and uninscribed, so there's nothing written on them that tells us what they are. It's just the opinions of a group of Egyptologists which have gradually, by some sort of magical alchemical process, transformed themselves into fact, quote unquote. And so anybody who opens an encyclopedia today and looks up the Great Pyramid of Egypt will be told that it's a tomb. But there is no evidence for that whatsoever. Now let's consider this extraordinary monument. It weighs 6 million tons. It stands exactly astride latitude 30, 1/3 of the way between the North Pole and the equator. It's perfectly oriented due north, south, east, and west. You know, a few weeks ago, I was in the Greenwich Observatory in London, which marks the Greenwich Meridian, the main north-south line on our planet. And the Greenwich Observatory is supposed to be the best aligned building in the Western world. It is 9/60ths of a single degree off true north. The architects couldn't get it quite to true north. The Great Pyramid, weighing 6 million tons, is just 3/60ths of a single degree off true north. Now I ask you this. If you're a pharaoh building a tomb, why do you need to align it so perfectly to due north? Most people don't even know where north is. And certainly the monument could be 3 or 6 or even 10 degrees off due north without anybody knowing the difference. And if its function was just to be a tomb, then there's no reason for this alignment. The alignment is astonishingly precise, and the precision begs many questions as to why they should set out to create these precise monuments. So these kind of questions, because Egyptologists don't want to get into engineering and architectural issues, but simply want to concentrate on the dust at their feet, are just never raised. Another thing that's never raised is the astronomical aspect of these monuments. To align a monument so perfectly to north, south, east, and west requires advanced astronomy. It takes astronomical sightings to create those alignments. And if we start looking at the Great Pyramids of Egypt from an astronomical point of view, we immediately start learning things about them that begin to shed doubt on the Egyptological picture. I've been working with astronomers on this subject, and it turns out that the 3 Great Pyramids of Egypt actually form a star map. They represent the 3 stars of Orion's belt, of the constellation of Orion. The pattern that the stars of the Orion's belt occupy in the sky is the pattern that the pyramids have on the ground. Now here's the interesting thing. The positions of the stars in the skies change down the epochs very, very slowly. This is caused by a wobble on the axis of the Earth, and that wobble is called precession, and it's a very slow cyclical process that takes almost 26,000 years to complete. From the point of view of the viewer on Earth, the result is that the positions of the stars in the skies gradually change. Because this process is regular and predictable, with modern computers, we can reconstruct what the ancient skies looked like over any part of the Earth we care to mention in any epoch. Anybody with a PC can do this today. And when you apply this aspect of study to the Great Pyramids, you discover something quite staggering. It's not just that they're a map of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, but they're a map of the 3 stars of Orion's belt not in 2500 BC, when Egyptologists say the pyramids were built, but in 10,500 BC. So it's as though those ancient pyramid builders were trying to specify a date by using the one true clock of our planet, which is the positions of the stars as viewed in the skies. And just in case anybody thinks that's a strange way to do these things, it's been done in the United States. The Hoover Dam also incorporates a star map. The architect of that dam wanted to find a way to memorialize forever the date on which the dam was completed. Even if our civilization vanished and our calendar system was lost, some future scientific, astronomically minded civilization would be able to work out the date, because he incorporated a star map into the architecture, froze the skies, as it were, above the Hoover Dam at the moment of completion. And this is what they seem to have done in Egypt as well. So as soon as you bring in these new sciences like astronomy, you start getting a different picture about the pyramids. And it's the same is true with the Sphinx. There, instead of astronomy, it's geology that sheds light on the mystery of the antiquity of that monument.
Okay. The early part of the early 1900s, didn't they change their dates on the pyramids, the building?
Well, yes. I mean, Egyptologists are constantly changing the dates. I don't want to sound like somebody who's just constantly knocking Egyptologists down. Egyptologists have done a fantastic job, and they've created a huge database of knowledge about Egypt, which is the result of years of painstaking study and research. And on that database, I myself and others who are working in this field have drawn liberally. But the fact of the matter is that they do have a very narrow and focused approach, and this leads to a shortness of view as to what the overall picture may be. There seems to be fashions operate in Egyptology. For a certain period, they consider that the monuments are such and such an age. Then somebody, a particularly venerable scholar, comes along, put forward a new idea, and they change their minds. And the reason that there's all this changing of mind is because there just isn't enough evidence, really, to go on. And that's why we need new sciences to understand these things. I mentioned a moment ago the geology of the Sphinx. Again, the Great Sphinx is supposed to be dated to 2500 BC. In fact, it's recently been studied by geologists from Boston University, Professor Robert Schoch, a leading specialist in the weathering of limestone, and John Anthony West. And their conclusion from the nature of the weathering patterns on the Sphinx is that this monument is 12,500 years old, that it dates back to 10,500 BC. It bears the unmistakable marks of what they call precipitation-induced weathering, weathering caused by heavy rainfall. And the last time there were sufficient rains in that area to cause that kind of weathering takes us back again to 12,500 years ago. So this is really why I call the book Fingerprints of the Gods, because all over the world there are fingerprints like these, hints, suggestions of evidence of vast antiquity to human civilization, which we're only just beginning to reconstruct now.
Another unusual fact in the book is the technology of Egypt, that the older monuments, the technology is higher level. Could you explain that? Or?
I think the only way it can be explained, if the Egyptologists are right, then this civilization, in its infancy, before it had had time to accumulate any experience of architecture at all, was building the most incredible monuments that the world has ever seen. And that doesn't make sense. The pyramids incorporate an enormous legacy of scientific and architectural knowledge, which can only have been accumulated over a very long period of time. And I explain in the book that the answer to that mystery is that this legacy comes from a much earlier, lost, advanced scientific civilization. It's even possible that they put inside the pyramid, particularly the Great Pyramid, something very specific which a later advanced civilization would be able to rediscover and recognize, which might give the whole picture of what happened to this great lost civilization. And again, this, I'm afraid, is another example of the narrowness of mind of Egyptologists, because in 1993, a German robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink decided to explore a previously unexplored shaft in the Great Pyramid. It's just 9 inches wide and 8 inches high, and it penetrates into the body of the Great Pyramid, but it doesn't exit on the outside. And Rudolf wondered, what's at the end of this shaft? He built a little high-tech robot. It's a tiny little thing with a video camera on the front of it, and he sent the robot up the shaft. And at the end of the shaft, after a journey of 200 feet, the robot discovered a door, complete with 2 metal fittings, and every indication that a great chamber lies beyond the door. Now, all the traditions of that area speak of the Hall of Records of the Gods as having been concealed somewhere in the vicinity of the Great Pyramid. And by the gods, I take it to mean the survivors of this great lost civilization. The amazing thing is that since that door was discovered, Egyptologists advising the Egyptian government have ensured that no further research has been done. Rudolf Gantenbrink has actually been banned from going back to do further research at the Great Pyramid. He said, okay, if you won't let me do it, then please do it yourself. And he's volunteered to give his robot to them, but they've refused to accept it. And for more than 2 years now, there's been no further investigation into this incredible possibility of a hidden chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And I think this is most unfortunate. I don't think it's a scientific approach. I think this information needs to be democratized and brought out to the public.
Okay, if we can switch gears a little bit and go to the front part of your book.
Yeah.
I guess I started there closer to the end. I find the maps, I think you've identified as Antarctica, the most convincing evidence of a former
That's right,
lost civilization. Would you review that area a little bit?
Yes, this is another one of the strange and mysterious legacies that has come down to us from long, long ago. There's a whole category of ancient maps, very ancient maps, which show the world as no ancient mapmaker should ever have been able to see it, and which incorporate, again, scientific precision in the making of the maps. And quite a lot of these maps appear to focus in particular on Antarctica. One example is the Piri Reis map, which is quite a well-known map, dated to 1513, 300 years before the discovery of Antarctica. And the Turkish admiral who drew that map stated in notes that he made on the map itself that the information wasn't his. The information was based on more than 20 earlier source maps, some of which went back to before the time of Christ and came from ancient Egypt. So goodness knows where those maps came from originally. Perhaps they were stored in the lost library of Alexandria, which was burnt down in Roman times. At any rate, what the Piri Reis map shows is the continent of Antarctica, 300 years before it was discovered, and it shows it not as it looks today, and not as it looked in 1513, but as it looked before it was covered by ice. It shows an ice-free Antarctica, and we've known, our civilization has known what the continent looks like under the ice since about the 1950s because of seismic surveys. But how could have this been known in ancient times? This is the mystery. It appears that some unidentified, advanced, seafaring civilization mapped Antarctica with fantastic accuracy before it was covered by ice, and that takes us back at least 14 or 15,000 years, and in a time when there's supposed to have been no human civilization on Earth at all, just cavemen. So there's a huge mystery here, and the Piri Reis map is not alone. There's many, many others just like it, which incorporate the same information, and they're all based on much older source maps.
Are there any official explanations of these maps? Or?
In all cases, the official response is it's just a coincidence. This is how all this anomalous, puzzling information is dismissed by scholars, is to say it's just a coincidence. It's just a coincidence that these maps have come down. It's just a coincidence that the Great Pyramid stands exactly 1/3 of the way between the North Pole and the equator. It's just a coincidence. You know, this is the thing that they keep on saying. It's just a coincidence that it's perfectly aligned to due north. I'm afraid what I've tried to show in the book is that there's far too many of these anomalies for it just to be a coincidence. What it all goes back to is a lost civilization which had the knowledge and the ability to do these things, and which was wiped out in the gigantic global cataclysm at the end of the last ice age.
I think that leads into the next question, your theory of lithosphere movement that caused the ice ages and the catastrophes. Could you go over that for us?
Right. Well, like so much else in the book, it isn't my theory. One of the things that I've done, and one of the functions that I fulfill as an author in this book, is to report the work of many different people around the world who've been chipping away at this problem for a long time. Back in the 1950s, an American professor, a man well ahead of his time, called Charles Hapgood, advanced an extremely interesting geological theory. And at the time, he received a strong endorsement for his theory from Albert Einstein, one of the greatest minds of our century. Einstein looked at it from the point of view of the physics of the theory, and he said, hey, this is right. This makes sense of everything. Broadly speaking, I'll try and simplify it. What it is this. We live on a planet. The planet is 8,000 miles thick, and on the outside of the planet is a thin outer crust, what they call the lithosphere, the crust of the Earth. That's what we all live on, and it's just 30 miles thick, and it floats on a kind of lubricating layer underneath, going down into the core of the Earth. According to the Hapgood-Einstein Earth crust displacement theory, from time to time, the entire outer crust of the Earth can move in one piece around the core, like the loose skin of an orange moving around the fruit. And when it does so, land that was situated close to one or other of the poles, and thus was heavily covered by ice, is shifted into warmer latitudes and the ice begins to melt. Now, in this theory, we find the first ever credible explanation for the mystery of the last ice age. Most everybody knows that North America was once a continent covered by ice. In fact, there were 6 million square miles of ice, more than 2 miles thick, covering North America as far south as the Mississippi Delta, almost into the tropics. This has never been explained by geologists. Earth crust displacement explains it. It says the reason the ice was there was very simple. The landmass of North America was much closer to the North Pole than it is today. It was in polar latitudes, and naturally there was ice on it. Then a displacement of the crust moved it down into warmer latitudes. And we're not talking about some gentle motion or slow-acting climate change here. We're talking about a cataclysm on a global scale. It affects the whole Earth, and it shoves that ice mass south into warmer latitudes, and all the ice melts. And this is exactly what happened. We had a huge ice mass on North America. It was stable for tens of thousands of years, and the geological record shows that it all melted within just 2,000 years. Sea levels went up by hundreds of feet, and huge numbers of animal species were rendered extinct all around the world. At the same time, on the southern end of the Earth, a vast continent that had previously been outside the Antarctic Circle was shoved dead center into the Antarctic Circle, and that continent is Antarctica, and it's now covered by 2-mile thick ice. And the suggestion is that the place that was the homeland of this lost civilization may have been Antarctica, which previously was in warmer latitudes. And the reason why we don't find more than just the fingerprints of the lost civilization, the reason why we don't find the body, as it were, is because it's lying under 2 miles of ice at the South Pole.
You also mentioned these civilizers, possibly from Antarctica, visiting South America. Would you go over that for us a bit?
All around the world, traditions have been maintained of strangers who came in a time of darkness and turmoil after some great disaster, bringing the gifts of civilization to a shattered and demoralized primitive people. We find this tradition in Egypt. We find it in Peru and Bolivia. We find it in Mexico and in almost every country of the world. And these people are described as tall and bearded, who came from across the seas on boats that moved by themselves without paddles, and they're remembered as the gods. I'm suggesting that all these memories tied up in ancient myths are memories of real events. These were the survivors of this great lost civilization, and they settled in other parts of the world, and they tried to keep the light of knowledge burning. They tried to restore civilization, and in some places they were more successful than they were in others, and Egypt is the one place where they really managed to leave a powerful legacy that no reversion to barbarism has ever been able to destroy, and it's still there, and all it takes is for us to open our eyes and look and see, and we'll find it staring us in the face.
We also find huge monuments in South America also. And what is the size of these stones that they put?
Well, one of the most extraordinary sites, I regard it as the New World counterpart of Giza, of the Great Pyramids. One of the most extraordinary sites is Tiwanaku in Bolivia in the high Andes, 12,500 feet above sea level in the area of Lake Titicaca. There is this extraordinary city, and nobody knows who built it, and nobody knows when it was built, and nobody knows why it was built, and nobody has any idea how it was built. But one thing's for sure, they were building with blocks of stone that weighed as much as 400 tons. A 400-ton stone block is equivalent in layman's terms to, say, 600 or 700 family-sized automobiles per block. We only have 2 cranes in the world today that can pick 200-ton loads. This ancient civilization, as yet unidentified by historians, had the technology to lift 400-ton blocks with ease, as though they were as light as feathers, and manipulate them and build them into huge, colossal structures, and then to perfectly align those structures to the cardinal directions and to other astronomical points. And in the case of Tiwanaku, again, if we apply astronomy and geology, both indicate that this site dates back again to before 10,000 BC. There's even images of extinct animal species carved on some of the monuments of the site. We have photographs in the book which show some of these species. For example, elephants carved on the Gateway of the Sun at Tiwanaku. There haven't been elephants in the New World for thousands of years, and the last time there was an elephant species in that area was before 10,000 BC. So again, it's a piece of evidence that speaks for itself, if only people will open their eyes.
Yeah, we also have pictures of statues and that of different racial groups in South America who are not native. Could you explain that?
Yes, I think the evidence suggests that this great lost civilization was a multi-ethnic civilization, rather like the United States is today. If some great disaster struck the world, and there's evidence that this shift of the crust may be something that will happen again, and perhaps quite soon. If that disaster occurred again, and thousands of years from now, archaeologists started digging up remains from America, they would find images predominantly of African types of people and of European types of people. And that's what we find in the earliest archaeological strata of Central America. It's a great mystery. We don't find images of Central American Indians. What we find, and what we only find in these ancient strata, thousands of years old, are images of proud and charismatic African men and bearded European types. And this is thousands of years before the time of Columbus. Nobody knows who these people were. I think they may be the images of the quote-unquote gods, the survivors of this great lost civilization.
I think you also list in there that there were a lot of records that were destroyed when the conquistadors and the Catholic missionaries took over South America.
It's one of the tragedies of our species that we're constantly wiping clean our own memory banks. I really think we're a species with amnesia, and one of the reasons that we are is because of what the Spanish did in South America and in Central America. They set out to deliberately vandalize and destroy the entire heritage of those wonderful civilizations, creating bonfires of ancient manuscripts which may have contained vast amounts of information of enormous importance to us, so that all that's survived is the verbal, the oral traditions. And what these oral traditions tell us, speaking of the great cataclysm that occurred before, is that the cataclysm will return again, and may return in our lifetime. And that's why I feel it's so important that we really start to look into this problem and look into it in detail. It may not be the case that that's going to happen, but I think it's vital that we look and study and learn about this.
Actually, I'd like to go on, but I think our time is about done. I'd like to thank the audience for being with us. And again, this is Graham Hancock and the author of the book, Fingerprints of the Gods. Thank you.
Thank you.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.